Hi everyone, I am Kedasha and welcome to Open Source Friday. Happy Friday to you all. I hope you had a good week. This week went so fast for me. It's like a blur. I cannot believe it's already Friday again. But today I'm super excited to have Mathesar on with Sean Colson to talk all about their application and how they, have an application where you can visualize your data on a UI. I'm so curious to see how it works and all the functionalities and so on. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to jump right into it and welcome Sean to the stage. Hi, Sean.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Kedasha.
Nice, of course. So we're so excited to have you on today. More people will join the stream. Don't worry about it. Typically, it's a full house. But how are you today? How is your week?
Doing great. Thanks.
Cool. So tell us more about Mathesar. But before that, even tell us more about you. Who is Sean? What does he do? And where are you based?
Okay. Yeah, I'm Sean Colson. I'm an engineer. I work full-time on Mathesar, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been just so jazzed about open source software since as long as I can remember, really. And I've been working with Mathesar for the last 2.5 years. My background is in like CRMs, other kind of data applications and web tech. I'm a self-taught engineer from back in kind of the late aughts.
Nice, nice. Self-taught is the way to go, because even if you do go to school, I mean, throughout the course of your year, you're pretty much self-taught.
Yeah, that's true.
to keep up with whatever is going on. So tell us about Mathesar. What is it? And like why open source?
Yeah. So Mathesar is a web application that gives you a spreadsheet-like interface to a Postgres database. And why open source? I think, I didn't start the project, but I was around kind of from early on, and I definitely have an insight to the motivations of everyone, who was involved in kind of the early seeds of thought germinating. And I think that open source was just kind of a given from the beginning of the project. Everyone who works on the project is very, very passionate about open source, and especially for a tool for data.
Yeah.
It's really important for things like privacy and owning your data, having control over it, and interoperability. And those are all part of the lofty goals of the Mathesar vision. As far as like why Mathesar specifically, not even just open source, the thing is, databases are so good at solving so many problems, but unless you're an engineer, they're quite inaccessible. And most people just end up using spreadsheets or something like that for their data, right? And there are products like Airtable, they kind of sit in this space in between spreadsheets and databases, which is cool, but they're not open source. And then there are a handful of open source, kind of like Airtable clones. And it's interesting because they're all kind of following the same sort of abstractions and patterns established by Airtable. There are some peculiar ways in which those patterns really diverge from the best practices of relational databases that people have been following for years. So compared to those products, Mathesar works a bit more like an actual database.
Okay.
And this lets non-technical users work with the same data as technical users, using the same abstractions and patterns and language. We just make it easy for everyone to use.
Nice. And so that's kind of how Mathesar came about, right? There was just like a gap in the market, and it's just like, who founded Mathesar, and like how did it even start to become a product?
Yeah, so Kriti Godi, she founded the project. She's our team lead, and she had this idea, and she just kind of took it and ran with it.
Nice.
And was able to pitch it and get funding from the right people. And for now, that's Reid Hoffman and the Reid Hoffman Foundation. For those who don't know, he's the guy who started LinkedIn, and he likes to give money to open source and other cool things. And we're still funded by them. And in the long term, we're exploring different ways of kind of diversifying that revenue. But we are very much committed to remaining fully open source. So we don't have any closed source features. There's not like core and things like that. We also don't have any VC funding. So the money that we have gotten from the Reid Hoffman Foundation is essentially a grant, and that allows us to be really flexible with our product strategy, and we're not beholden to any corporate interests in that way.
Nice. That's always the best, when you can really focus on the core features and functionality of the product without worrying about like the board and stakeholder, like funding and like money, essentially. Is what I'm trying to say without saying it, but I guess you just have to say it.
And I mean, speaking of the board, we are, to be clear, we're a nonprofit, 501c3 Mathesar Foundation, and that also gives us some broader accountability, fiscally, and organizationally, and everything, and some kind of helps us with the longevity of the project as well.
Nice. So can you show us Mathesar so we can see what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I actually want to get started with the demo by just looking at Postgres itself. So not even with Mathesar yet. We're just connected to PSQL through the terminal here, and we're connected to a database called Conference, which has some kind of conference type data. You can see the list of tables here. We have talks and speakers and rooms and blocks and so on. We could take a quick look at a little bit of that data in Postgres itself. This is all fake data. You can even go work with this data on our live demo, demo.mathesar.org, and you can play with it in Mathesar, which is what we're going to do now. We're going to connect to it, and let's pretend that we want to update this field. This is the title of a talk, the Mathesar vision. We want to go in and just tweak that a little bit using Mathesar. Okay. So here we are with Mathesar open, and we're going to go ahead and add a connection to this database. We don't have to, oh, that's fun. Oh, you know what? I didn't, I didn't start it.
That's okay.
Turn it on and off again. Let's see if we can do this again. I'm just running this locally on my machine, and that helps me see the data in Postgres alongside the data in the web application.
Okay.
So we're going to add a connection to this conference database. And you can connect Mathesar to many different databases, and they can be either on your machine or on a remote machine. And then you can add different people kind of to your project to be able to collaborate with them, on that same data. It's taking a while because it's actually, I'm running on the development version of it, which does some additional debugging and whatnot when it first loads. Okay, so here we are on that screen again. Conference database, gonna add this connection. And over in Postgres, I pulled up the data in the talks table. And let's just click through to that. You can see all the same tables in Mathesar. You can open up this talks table and go, see all these same talks. And just like a spreadsheet, you can go in here and make some changes, and then you can see them reflected back in Postgres. So, it's nothing fancy, but it's convenient because other clients and other applications can be connected to this same database through Postgres. And you might have, if this is an actual conference, you might have some sort of public-facing website, and this can be kind of like almost like a back office admin type tool for if it's just ready to go to work with your data. What we'll notice here, though, is in Postgres, we have the room and the speaker are just showing us these numbers. And in Mathesar, we see like some little text in these orange boxes. So what's going on here? Well, if we look at the structure of this talks table in Postgres, you'll see that things like room, the room column has a foreign key, which references records in the rooms table. And so what Mathesar has done is it's picked up on that foreign key, and it's turned this room column into sort of a link that references rooms records. And we can even go, say we want to change this to a different room. We can go pick a different one. And then over here, we see that, that room got changed. And what this allows you to do is it lets you work with actual foreign key columns in a really easy to use way. Over here in the speaker column, you can see Emily. What does that mean? This is Mathesar's way of basically summarizing or giving you a little preview of that record. So instead of 5, we see Emily, and we can go and customize that by adding some more data. Like in this case, maybe we want to see also the last name. And so that's going to actually change the way that all of those records display, not just that one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so let's take a step back here. When we change this title and room, we could see those changes reflected back in our Postgres database, right where you would expect. But when we changed this, we call it the record summary, and we have a template for the record summary. So when we changed the record summary template, where did that get saved? Postgres doesn't have any concept of a record summary. That's a Mathesar concept. So it turns out we actually put that record summary template into some metadata that Mathesar keeps alongside your database. And this behavior, I think, is a good way to showcase our product philosophy, which is quite different from all the other relational spreadsheet applications out there. See, in Mathesar, we want the UI to mirror the functionality of Postgres as closely as possible. And we also want Mathesar to be really easy to use, even for people with no database experience. these two goals can sometimes be in tension, and the way that we're choosing to strike that balance is by just leaning really heavily on Postgres. So things like schemas and data types, foreign keys, and other kinds of constraints, and even up here, this little column description field, those all map one-to-one to their equivalent mechanisms in Postgres.
Wow, okay.
And on top of that, Mathesar adds this thin layer of metadata to handle things like this record summary template, which don't have anywhere to go in Postgres.
Right.
And our goal is to keep that metadata layer as thin as possible. We basically use it to control the way things display within the UI. So we can use it for things like formatting a number with a specific number of fixed decimal places, or formatting a date in different locales and things like that. And the point here is that when you use Mathesar, you get a really accurate picture of your data's structure as it actually is stored in Postgres. And you can work with that data without needing to know much about Postgres itself. So to shift gears a bit, let's pretend that we are organizing this conference, and we've decided to institute a new rule that speakers should not give more than 2 talks. How can we see if there are any speakers who have more than 2 talks already? Well, Mathesar has this built-in sort of visual query builder called the Data Explorer. We're going to open that to figure this out. So we're going to go to look at records in the speakers table. We're going to add some columns here. And right now we have 1 row per speaker, and then we can pull in some aggregate data for all of the many talks associated with each speaker. And we can summarize this as a count. So we can see, okay, 2, 2, 2, that's fine. Uh-oh, 4, like that's not going to work for our new rule that we're establishing. And then we can even add an additional transformation, which filters this to show only the speakers with more than 2 talks. So we can see Emily has 4, so like we really need to go talk to her. And maybe we want to add in the email column so we can go contact all these people. So it's kind of gives you a sense of how you can work with your data, without needing to know much about like SQL or databases or anything like that.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's a great way for people, for anyone actually, to keep information updated without having to know how to use Postgres or log into a database and figure out all that jazz.
Yeah.
It's really nice, and it's so intuitive to use. I love how it's designed as well, because it looks familiar, which is something else that I also like about this UI design.
Good. Yeah, that's good to hear. Should I keep going? I have some more
to
demo.
Keep going. Yeah,
cool.
Keep going.
Let's just go ahead and save this as a saved exploration, and then we can see it back here, so you can come back to it anytime you want. So remember how there was that person Emily with 4 talks, right? How do we see all of those talks that just Emily has? Well, we could go to the talks table and we could filter with speaker equals Emily. That's possible, but there's another way that I think is really cool that I want to show you. Every record in every table has its own page in Mathesar, and so we can actually pull up Emily's record and we can see everything related to her. So Emily only has 1 bio, and in this data model, Emily only has 1 email, but she has multiple talks. And so all of that stuff displays, we call this the record page for this record, with the things you have 1 of up at the top and the things you have many of down here at the bottom. And there's even a record page, say for this talk, building data models by Emily. We can just make sure I'm doing the right thing next here. We can go open this one and see it's got got all this data associated with it. So let's pretend that Emily has responded to us, and she said, great, happy to give only 2 talks, building data models. I'm going to hand that over to my colleague.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to give that talk instead. Please update it. His name's Dan Miller, let's just say. So in this example, we're going to go here, and what's interesting at this point is we want to associate this talk with a speaker, but we don't yet know if we have a record for that speaker in our database. So we can kind of start filtering. We can say, ooh, we probably don't have a record for Dan Miller. We need to create one before we can associate this talk with that record. We can actually continue going ahead through this process, and we can see this is sort of this fuzzy search, which shows us all of these possible contact records, because we're actually starting the process of adding Dan Miller right now, and we can say create record from our search criteria, and then now we just created Dan and associated this talk with him. So there's a lot of work that we've been doing in the UI to make all this data entry and updating, just really fast and easy for people.
Yeah.
Down here, we see that this talk is categorized as management. So each talk can have many topics, and each topic can have many talks. This management isn't quite right, so let's go. We can associate this with, say, database, and maybe we also want to pick SQL, and then we're going to go ahead and remove management. So that showcases a nice kind of many-to-many relationship, and how we let you work with those relationships. But let's pretend that in addition to talk topics, we also want to associate one talk with one kind of track in the way you would think of it in a conference, and then one track can have many talks. Let's use Mathesar to extend our data model by adding a new table for tracks. I have some data for tracks I can just paste in here, and we will call this table tracks. We can see these tracks that it's going to import, and there's the tracks table. And if we go over to the talks table, we need a relationship between talks and their tracks, so we can create this relationship from talks to tracks, and it gives us these different ways we can relate those 2 tables to one another. Gives us some prose to kind of think through these different things, and this is the one we want in this case, because multiple talks can link to the same track. And it tells us, we're going to add a new column in the talks table called track. You can customize that if you want. So Mathesar is all about helping you work with these relationships in the way that the database actually stores them. So now we can start to kind of build this out with, like, let's go ahead and add some tracks here, and then finally we can go open up the page for that track, and then we can see all the talks associated with it. And then to circle back to Postgres, our talks table has now been updated with a new column, just like it shows in the UI. It says track, and there's a foreign key to the tracks table. So I hope this gives everyone a good idea of how Mathesar makes it easy for anyone to work with relational data in Postgres. And we have lots of other exciting features planned on our roadmap. So where should we go from here?
Cool. So, like, how do we integrate Mathesar with our Postgres database? How does that process work?
Yeah, good question. What we did here, you remember this very beginning step where I added this connection.
Okay.
Mathesar, it's just going to connect to the database on a running Postgres server. And when you install Mathesar, there are a variety of different ways to install it. And we give you a choice between using your own Postgres server that's somewhere else, on a different server from the Mathesar web server, or you can kind of install Mathesar with a Postgres server sort of bundled in, like in the same Docker image. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Cool. And how is Mathesar built? What tools, technologies, etc. are you using to build Mathesar?
Right.
It's really impressive, to be honest.
Cool. Yeah. So to give you a sense of our tech stack, it's a typical web stack with the back end and the front end. The back end is in Python and Django, and we use Postgres, obviously. I mentioned that layer of metadata. We prefer to store that metadata in Postgres, but we do have a means of storing it also in SQLite, but it's sort of shy people away from that. But the kind of Postgres, if you think of your typical web stack, like the database is part of it. And this application is interesting because like it's actually designed to use a database that is very much decoupled from like your Mathesar application. It stands on its own. Your user database, you can do whatever you want to it as far as adding columns and dropping them, and Mathesar is just going to pick up on everything that's going on in the user database. So that obviously is Postgres. And as far as our stack is concerned, we have an interesting approach here because we are building a lot of logic into the database itself in the database layer. And so we have quite a bit of code, and we're gradually shifting more and more code into procedural SQL within Postgres. That's just a bunch of triggers basically and some types and things like that that get installed in your Postgres database when you set up a connection with Mathesar.
Nice.
That's all the back end. And then on the front end, we use Svelte, the front end framework, and TypeScript with Svelte. I think that probably ought to cover all the bases as far as the tech stack.
Nice. Why did you decide to use Svelte over something like React?
Good question. Nobody got fired for picking React, right? Yeah, and I'll say that the decision to use Svelte was made like very soon before I joined the team. But I kind of joined the team because I really like Svelte.
Okay.
So it's in my case, it's sort of like I'm here because of Svelte instead of Svelte is here because of me.
Gotcha.
But to get into the head of our other front-end engineer, Pavish, Svelte is awesome, and there are some like things I could pick on if you want to get spicy with like there's some things I like better about React as opposed to Svelte. And this is like what I work on, right? I'm a front-end engineer, so like on the team, I'm doing Svelte and TypeScript a lot.
Nice. Not
really any Python. But yeah, it's a lot faster, to be honest, like working in Svelte for me. And I have worked in React before, but it's just very Svelte. It's very simple, and like you just don't have to write as much code. But yeah. Another interesting point on this is like a lot of the reason that people don't choose Svelte typically is that the ecosystem is not as mature, and there are all of these component libraries with React, and
I know
you just pick anything off the shelf and whatever you want. It's just right there. And towards that end, we have been working on building out our own component library, which is kind of tucked away under the hood at the moment. And we have these like longer term visions of maybe like taking all these components and all of this like UI and things like we have a lot of like work that we've done here custom, and it's taken a lot of time, but our hope is that we can eventually release that as its own component library for the Svelte ecosystem.
Nice.
But in terms of like React versus Svelte, I'll also say that like Svelte does actually make that work a little bit harder than React does, like working with these higher levels of abstraction and like making your own component library, I find to be a little bit harder in Svelte than React.
Interesting. I haven't used Svelte. I've used React, but I am looking for another framework to use for building the UI, because React is kind of, it's kind of much, especially for like smaller projects. Whenever I need to build like a demo for a conference or a talk or a workshop, I find React so heavy. So Svelte is definitely looking like an option to try.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so one question for you from our viewer is, so Mathesar is open sourceware for Postgres database. Can it also be used by any other databases such as MySQL or MongoDB?
Great question. Right now, the answer is simply no, because we are really focusing on tight integration with Postgres. And I mentioned all that logic that lives in the DB layer. That's going to help with performance. And we have a lot of backend restructuring going on right now. So some of these things are in flux, but when the chips all fall, we're going to end up with a really nice, really seamless integration with the Postgres server itself. That's kind of the medium-term vision. And there's some really neat advantages to that approach. In the longer term, there is some opportunity to work with Postgres foreign data wrappers to connect basically through Postgres to other databases. I never know how to say that. Is it the database or the database application? RDM, DBMS, right? Anyway, things like MySQL and all those other tools. To be clear, you'll still have to have a Postgres server running, but then you can set up a connection between Postgres to MySQL and be able to read and write data in a MySQL database as well. That's further out on the horizon, though.
Yeah. But it sounds like it's being thought about, and there is a loose plan in place. It's great that Postgres does that. That's amazing. So, like, what would you say, Sean, is some of the biggest challenges you faced while maintaining and working on Mathesar?
Yeah, well, I mentioned in the demo that there's this tension between these two broad product goals that we have. On the one hand, we want Mathesar to represent Postgres as accurately as possible. And on the other hand, we want to make Mathesar really easy to use. And in that sense, like we're trying to do something relatively novel here by mashing those two sometimes competing goals against each other. And so the product design and UX design has required a lot of thought on, within our team. And we have all these debates about like, what's the best way to do this? And how do we want to actually strike that balance and do, for example, if you go to this conference database, I kind of glossed over this in the demo, but like you land here and you're like, okay, this is our conference data. And then you see this thing called public. And it's like, well, okay, on the one hand, that kind of needs to be there because it's a schema, and a schema is a fundamental concept within Postgres that's really hard to escape. But on the other hand, that can be a little bit confusing for people who aren't already familiar with Postgres. And some of our user testing has surfaced that confusion. So that's, I think, one of the most challenging things I've seen is finding the right designs to balance those goals.
Yeah. I can see how that would be a little jarring if I'm like working at a company and they're using Mathesar to interact with the database, and then I see public. It's like, what is that? And then I start clicking on buttons, but can you even click on it? It looks like it's locked.
It's like a big card. It's this is great feedback. The lock. Oh, so I like that. You said it looks like it's locked, and you maybe thought you couldn't click on it. So to be clear, did you think that you couldn't click on it because of the lock icon, or was
because of the lock, and it looks a little grayed out.
Yeah. So right, and we can even add a schema here.
I see.
And that one's not gray. And the reason for that is that every Postgres database has a schema called public. And the permissions are a little bit different for that schema. And like that's just it's hard for us to get around because like we're committed to this like functionality that matches Postgres. But this is actually great feedback from you. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, you're welcome. We have another question from the audience. What about data security and access control? How do you ensure the security and privacy of user data in Mathesar?
Okay, so there's two ways to answer that question, and one is with current Mathesar, which is 0.1.5. We're releasing every month, and we're still in alpha, I'll say. And permissions, the permissioning system that we have currently, is very nascent, and we just sort of we're basically using like Django permissions to manage Mathesar users and to manage the way the permissioning of different operations. But we kind of like have identified a while ago that we really can't continue with that approach. And so what we're doing is for our beta, which we're really working hard on right now, is working on twisting that around so that we're going to be leaning on the Postgres roles and permissions system. So you'll be able to configure different Mathesar users to have a mapping between a Mathesar user and a Postgres role, a login role, to be clear. And you can, so each physical person like interacting with your project can either have their own Postgres role or they can share Postgres roles. And then you can use the like elaborate and very powerful Postgres permissioning system to manage access controls. And then you can get things like row level security and all this other cool stuff. We're still kind of in some of the early stages of implementing all of that, but it's definitely something we're going to have for Mathesar's beta release.
Nice. That's a nice comprehensive answer. I love it. So when it comes to querying or updating data in Mathesar, have there been any problems or issues with doing that or even querying data?
Yeah, well, problems or issues. Okay, well, let me start by saying, just as a caveat, I mostly focus on the front end, and so I'm gonna try to give what I think is what might be an interesting answer to this question, but I want to set people's expectations that maybe I'm going to get some of this stuff wrong because this isn't actually the area of the code base that I've personally been involved in. But
that's okay.
As far as like a problem, early on, we started, well, the people before me and the backend engineers started with Python and Django and SQL Alchemy, which is like sort of ORM kind of thing for Django. And the way that SQL Alchemy works, it's really not designed with our use case in mind, because the way that they want you to build your application is like, you're building a SaaS application or something, and your schema is essentially tied to your application. So if your column changes or you add a new table or something like that, that should not happen very often.
Oh yeah.
And when it does, you should have some more control over it at the like application and the code level. That's not what Mathesar is, because Mathesar is connecting to this user database, which is from the perspective of the application, that's kind of this like unknown and, like I mentioned, decoupled thing that lives over here. And that kind of impedance mismatch between SQL Alchemy and our needs created some problems, which we're still in the process of resolving. And then the problem is in this like global mutable state is like the root of all evil. Sometimes computer scientists will like to talk about, because what SQL Alchemy does is it has this reflection step of like, you can tell SQL Alchemy, okay, go like introspect my database, figure out everything figure out all of its structure, and then report back to me, and then I can work with it, and update data and run queries, to the point of your question. But we end up having to run that reflection step more than is performant. And so we're working on re-architecting the back end of Mathesar, you'll notice you may have noticed some of the slowness when I was doing the live demo, and that's due to that reflection step that is running more than it should. And so we're in the process of kind of pulling SQL Alchemy out of the Mathesar backend right now. And this is also something that is very pressing for releasing the Mathesar beta, so we can get to a point where performance is really top notch.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to updating the product and even updating that functionality and removing SQL Alchemy, are you looking for contributors? How can people contribute to the project?
Great. Yeah. So I knew you were going to ask this question, and I'm thinking about it. And where my mind went first was like, just go to our GitHub repository and find our README and just like follow the steps. And we have a contributor guide, and that's going to tell you things like go to our issue queue and look for help wanted and good first issue. And we have all of those. And we have a couple dozen help wanted issues right now, and those are all good things. If you really want to contribute code, and if you really want to like get into some Python or some Svelte or some TypeScript or something like that, and I definitely encourage people to do that. But there's another way which I'm thinking more about just this morning, which is like we really actually need people to just go install Mathesar and give us some feedback. Like you pointed out this lock icon, because like that is a challenge that we're facing is just like design and usability and product like feature requests, and we have so much that we want to build with Mathesar, and we're so excited about building so many things, and so we also could use the community's help to steer us in the right direction. And we have a whole roadmap that's on our public website, mathesar.org roadmap, and that actually links to a bunch of different GitHub discussions. And the discussions are our place of just sort of putting a pin in these bigger features that we haven't begun really designing yet. But if people could go and even just put a little thumbs up on this kind of features that they would most want on our roadmap, that would be really helpful. That's like you don't need to know any code, you just want to help us out. That's kind of the best place to start. And then installing Mathesar, we need people who are a little bit inclined as far as like Unix, sysadmin, DevOps type skills to install Mathesar, try it out with Docker, try it out without Docker, and go through the steps and tell us where you got hung up, and tell us, you want Mathesar with Kubernetes or something like that. Like we need some feedback on that kind of stuff. I hope that gives you kind of a good answer of, my hope is that anyone could get involved in helping out with Mathesar at this point.
Sure thing. That's really good feedback, and I'm happy that you were very specific in the needs of Mathesar in terms of getting feedback and help from the community. So everyone, check out the issues if you want to, dive into the code and update the code base and also the documentation. But also just use Mathesar and provide feedback to the engineers and the wonderful people that is working on the product. Thanks so much, Sean, for being here. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or anything. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Open Source Friday. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us. This has been a really good conversation. I am super excited about Mathesar and the work that you're doing. Please keep it up. Hopefully, you can keep the lights on with those funding to keep going, because this is really great. It's a great way to interact with a database without actually interacting with the database with like a beautiful UI and everything. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and see y'all next week. Bye.